Hello, my explorers. Nice to meet you all. I'm Ignacio Zaballos. I am also an entrepreneur. I've been part also on the Explorer program on the past, and today we are here for interviewing Tara Matamoros. Tara has over 25 years of experience in mentoring, growing, and advising startups, investor relations, omnichannel marketing, business strategy, deep technology, and product development, diversity and inclusion, predictive analysis, data visualization, business intelligence, and activism. Wow, it's the perfect partner for a startup. He is currently working in the center in technology trends, the workforce of the future, strategic marketing, social media and SEO, mobile app development, and intelligent problem solving in business while simultaneously fostering diversity and inclusion in the workplace. He has also have worked with clients, including a number of world-leading corporations such as Accenture, Citi, Fluor, Dorel, Provity, Forbes, and Wells Fargo. Normally, when he works, he covers a wide range of capabilities. For example, primary qualitative and quantitative market research, focus groups, surveys, interviews, then research and inferential data analysis, also segment and market analysis for website using user behavior analysis, partnership development, building deep technology solution, and also growing startups from ideation to securing investment rounds. Hello, Tara. How are you?
Good. How are you today?
Really good, really good.
Excited to join you.
Yeah, a lot. I'm sure the explorers are going to learn a lot from your experience, which is a super vast one, and I'm sure it's going to be super helpful. So let's start. So first question that I would ask to you is, how did you get to where you are today? I mean, normally you actually get to this part, you will have like a lot of experience and previous experiences that could be super helpful for us to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just rolling back to the beginning. I was always interested in research, found myself to be like a really innately curious person and was drawn to medical research at first. So that's where my roots were. I went to a university. I studied something completely outside of entrepreneurship. I was a neurobio major, but I was really focused and curious about solving problems. And I guess that's where my entrepreneurial spirit started. Science is like a puzzle, right? Putting jigsaw pieces together, trying to figure out what the solution is. Experiments, design was so key. And so when I left university, I headed an organ donation project for the state of Georgia. It was a research-based project, and our goal was to really try and procure additional new and expanded organ donors in the state, right? If you can imagine, the population was very ill. There were, loads and loads of people on the organ donor list. And my job was really to look at all of the codes that were, generating organ donors and see if we can expand that rate, right? So if we can expand the criteria, looking at additional codes that might, lead to a viable organ donor. And so that was really key. It was such meaningful work too, to have an impact on folks, right, who are just real desperate in looking for a way to live, to continue living. But it was also neat because outside of the research part of it, I also worked on an educational program, which just made it so much more fulfilling. Love interacting with people. So taking that research and then, transferring that to physicians and really the community at large to educate them about organ donors. So I did a lot of testing to understand what the sentiment was in the audience segment, right? And really the population was just not educated about what an organ donor means. They were worried about going into the grave and, maybe not, ascending well. There were just a lot of misnomers tied to that. And so it was a great deal of education that really needed to happen on the public level to assure them that it is safe and that, there's no, harm or distress that people are put in. We're not pulling the plug earlier than we should be, when they have a potential of life. The person is clinically, dead, deceased at that point. And surprisingly, I found a lot of physicians were just not educated on how to approach their patients about organ donors. So did a lot of upfront research to understand why, came up with an educational program to assess that. And then, as I rolled it out, did pulse checks along the way to make sure that the program was running efficiently, that we were training the right things. That's so key. And, that's something that I employ on a lot, that testing mentality. You only know so much. I always say that we don't start with the solution, we start with the problem. And immerse ourselves in folks who are able to speak about the problem and the challenges that they're facing, instead of me pushing my solution onto them. So it's a little bit of a spin twist there. And that was key, and it gave great feedback. So that's where I really felt that I learned to be agile. We talk a lot about agility in entrepreneurship, and having the mindset that you're not specifically tied to your idea, do or death. Yeah, exactly. It's so key. It almost feels as if you're letting go of your dream, your child, something that you've thought of and you thought was great, only to find that it wasn't the right fit for your target audience, right? And at the end of the day, that's what we're looking to solve, problems for people, not just for ourselves, right? Who may have a different slanted view of it. So really separating my vision versus what folks were looking for, the problem, that they were facing, and being able to pivot and be agile in adjusting that process was key. Because at the end of the day, my goal was to educate the community, to make them understand about organ donation, to educate physicians and whatnot. And I wouldn't be successful in that project, if you think about it, a lot of lives are on the line, if I wasn't speaking to that target audience. So that was a really, really great project. Of course, all grants are funded with a finite time period, and so it wasn't lasting forever. Made my mark on it, which was phenomenal. And then, I moved back up north. That position was in Georgia, to the New York area, and focused, honestly, having that mindset of research and neurobiology, and then applying that to community medicine, which is what the Organ Donor Project was interesting. And so I was questioning, what am I going to do for, moving forward? That was such a niche project. Is there going to be something else like it? So it happened that, again, just drawing on that mentality of, try and delve into things and just put your whole heart into them to learn something new. I learned a lot from that. I also learned a lot about marketing, something I knew really nothing about at that moment. And here I am, marketing to communities, marketing to physicians, which was totally unexpected. So I took a temporary job moving back north. I worked at a company called Accenture. They're a global company, marketing consulting firm. And I thought it would be temporary. I thought, I just have the skill set to check the boxes for this. But I really found it to be an immense growing opportunity. So I headed the marketing research department for Accenture for several years. It started with me, one individual, if you can imagine, grew it up to a team of about 20, which was huge, right? So yeah, absolutely. So there's another instance of, marketing dollars, right? So Accenture's global budget was a multi-billion-dollar marketing budget. Without data to drive where they're going to invest their dollars in, it would not be as successful as it was, right? We want to be efficient. We want to be a well-oiled machine. And so I made the case to the team that, hey, we're just flying blind here, investing money in things that, the vendor was telling us was good, when in actuality, it's not. They're going to tell you a story that you want to hear. You really need to delve into the data to understand if it's really working for you, right? So did a lot of work in that group, and it was fun. It was challenging in the sense of I was in such a global firm. I was able to apply my knowledge to different topic areas, right? So they have, work in the products division, in the retail division, healthcare and life sciences, federal. And so it was just like taking a different lens with what I knew and applying it to different scenarios, which was fun, right? So again, the one size doesn't fit all scenario. What works for one topic area like life science may not work for, say, federal, right? So you have to be able to be agile and be able to pivot with that, which was a lot of fun, right? To understand. So in my work there, I in looking back, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was a really big hand raiser, right? So if someone came to me and said, hey, we have this project coming up, this opportunity to work on something, is anyone interested? I would always raise my hands. I took on a lot of work. I did work, beyond extended hours, but I was curious, right? So that's my research background coming into play of, I want to absorb information and knowledge. So not only did I work in that marketing analytics area, but I headed the redesign for Accenture.com, which was huge, right? I headed the integration to a new platform for the company too. These were areas that I knew nothing about before: technology, design, and I really had to learn a lot. I learned a lot on the job, on my back end, in order to come up to speed to lead a project like that, if you can imagine. So great opportunity. I really learned a lot there. I came into contact with an individual there who headed our SEO department. And way back then, SEO was just getting up to speed. Like, what is SEO? We have control over what, the Google algorithm, and can tap into that to be efficient. And so Accenture was real, taking leader stance in this and wanting to harness the power. So we set up a division focused on that. Well, the individual who started that section ended up leaving after he made his mark, and he started his own startup. I had no idea. Okay, so no clue whatsoever that he had left. Came into passing with him a few times, but a few years down the road, he connects with me on LinkedIn and says, "Hey, Tara, are you interested in joining my startup? We work together at Accenture." Meanwhile, I had no recollection of this. I remembered him as someone who was in the SEO division, but don't remember any specifics in talking to him. But I left a mark on him, and the mark was that I was scrappy, that I, was real into solving problems, and not just solving them for the sake of like checking a box, but in order to get it right. So I'm not going to settle. I'm going to really dig deep until I understand, what's going on and have a good solution. And those were things that he said back to me, which I was amazed to hear from that outside, perspective. Number one, and number two, that he remembered me over several years to hit me up about, something like that, right? So totally, taken back by it. And I had never even thought about startups, never worked in that area at all. I was nervous, but I said, let me just explore, right? So I put my hat on of, being inquisitive and wanting to try something different. But of course, I'm a hard worker. I provide for my family. I'm a lone parent. I was nervous to make a switch over. So I said, let me consult, right? So that's how I started. And on the side, I worked my regular 40 hours with my main job, stable job. And then I put some time in on the side for working with, with this company. It was a technology startup in Silicon Valley, right? And, Silicon Valley, lots of draw tied to that. It sounded exciting, right? So I was, really interested in it. Did I work on marketing analytics for them? No, absolutely not. He was interested in my mindset and applying that to his scenario. So I worked in business planning. I headed their operations. I ended up doing a ton of different things at a startup, and truthfully, that's I've learned, that the commonality among them is that you just go wherever the need is, right? And so, I did a few hours at first, each week and whatnot, and soon I was working pretty much full-time hours as a consultant. Which is very financially lucrative, in addition to my main job. And I maintained that for a good year. I was nervous. I was nervous about, moving over completely and putting all my stakes in a startup when I had this real stable, button up job, 20 some odd years invested in it. And it was just comfortable, right? And it's tough to make a change to something really different than what I'd known over, many, many years, 2 decades, right? You can imagine.
I would say the most difficult part when starting a startup is actually get out of the comfort zone.
Exactly.
Start a new venture. It's something crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did, right? So, and I maintained that for 2 years. I had to prove, not to him, but I had to prove that to myself, right? That I was really like, this is the route that I wanted to go into. So I switched them up, right? So instead of consulting for the startup and working my main job, I switched it up and ended up working my main job at the startup company and consulted for my old firm, right? So I still maintain ties. To me, that was very important. Networking is so key. And that was great. But then I was able to put more energy, all of my time into the startup world, which was phenomenal. So this tech company in Silicon Valley, it was really exciting. We worked on many different projects, working with new startups. We positioned ourselves as the tech engine for an accelerator. We partnered with a venture capital company called Backstage Capital. And then we also did that for other startups on our own on the side, right? That had come to us. Most of them were early stage, and they were looking for guidance from many different, places where they were at that point, whether it be from idea formation, product market fit, doing upfront testing to developing a marketing plan, MVP. I want to say MVP was probably where we spent the majority of our time, right? One thing I really learned in that is understanding that an MVP should not be your end solution, right? It's really just a start in the ground, stake in the ground, where you're getting going on things. It shouldn't have a lot of features tied to it. So that was probably one of the biggest feedback that I heard from founders was, we want to include all these bells and whistles in our upfront, MVP, our first one. And that's just it's not sound, right? Because you don't know if your solution is solving the problem for your target audience yet. And why invest so much dollars into, colors and, features of notifications and this and that, when you want to save money and conserve and validate what your hypothesis was, right? That I'm going to solve problem X.
Yeah, and actually the final product you are going to have is the users that is going to tell you what they need. So it doesn't make sense to actually develop a super complicated product when actually nobody is going to use most of the features.
Exactly. Absolutely. And hands down. And it's just more efficient to run that way for your time, for your money, for your energy, because you may have to pivot. Your data may tell you that what you think your solution is, AKA going back to my organ donation time, is not really what others feel is beneficial to them. So that's number one. And number two, you have to make something that people will want to pay for, right? So you want to switch their mindset from whatever it was that they were using previously, if it is, if there was something else out there, and then it has to be lucrative enough for them to want to, pay for, right? So they want to have to spill out dollars for it. We're not giving free services away. So that's really key. So my time with that group was just so immensely insightful. One thing I mentioned, Backstage Capital, and the founders for the tech company that I started with were immigrants, right? They were not natively born here. At least one of them was, and they really felt very deeply. Their thesis was to tap into and help companies that were underestimated, right? So an underestimated founder is someone who doesn't fit the norm of, the stereotypical founder, which in the US is traditionally a white male with Ivy League education and so forth. So someone with, expanded criteria from many different dimensions. It could be, those who didn't go to college, right? So educational, socioeconomical. It could be gender, it could be, sexual orientation, race, many different dimensions. And so it was very natural that they aligned to Backstage Capital, because Backstage Capital, their investment thesis is in underestimated talent. So everyone in their portfolio has a tie into that. And so that's, how they position themselves in the marketplace. So again, even with Backstage Capital, I mentioned that we were the tech engine behind them, but I wore many hats for that group as well. So tapping into my research background, I headed an investor day program for them. It's something we talked about in a team meeting one day, and Arlen Hamilton, who was the head there, still is, she, we were talking about how can we help our founders more, right? So how can we get money in their pockets so that they can move along and, fund things like testing and their MVP development and so forth. And so we came up with this program called an Investor Day series. It was run through, we did a pilot at first, and then we rolled it out to other cities across the United States. And it was, the goal of it was, quote unquote, let's make a deal, right? It sounds so lucrative, right? Let's make a deal. But the point was really to get investors to sign checks, right? Let's money, like actual deals. And she was so hard on that with our portfolio companies. And so I would match them, right? So I would tap into this massive investor list. We had a master investor list that indexed all investors out there, VCs, angels, and so forth, that were aligned to our investment thesis in some way. It may not be primary, but in some way they were considering, diversity in their investment thesis. And the point was for them to have meaningful conversations during this investor day, right? So aligning our investors that I had accrued with our, with our portfolio. So there's a lot of matching nodes that need to go on with that, if you can imagine, right? So the investor needs to, number one, the portfolio company needs to be actively in a fundraising stage, right? So they're raising at that point. And then the investor needs to have some deals that they're, that they have available to make, so some deal flow opportunity. They have to align to our investment thesis, and their sector, right, has to align to at least, one or two of our portfolio companies. So that was really important, right? So I had to look across all those different nodes in making sure that I was matching people correctly, over, the entire day that transpired in our little, time slots, to make sure that we were having, efficient interactions. Yeah. So it was a hit. It was so fun. And it was nice because outside of, having those meaningful conversations about, investment, the founders were able to talk to other entrepreneurs, right, within our space. They all had that commonality of being underestimated. And so they, had lunches together. We had a dinner with them as well. And it's just so inspiring to tap into learnings among groups, right? So we all live in our individual spaces sometimes, right? Of my little area, it's comfortable, but we learn most when we talk with others and communicate with others to understand what's working well for them, what's not working well for them. And I just saw so much cross, quote unquote, pollination between groups of learning, right? So, how are you managing your tech? Oh, I'm doing it this way. Oh, that's so interesting. Can I tap into that? Or let me connect you to someone. So they were immense networking events as well, if you can imagine. Which was great. And so rolled that out across many different cities throughout the US, huge success. I also worked on developing a matching program, right, to help automate that. I don't want to sit there and do the check boxes of matching and following up with everyone. It's so cumbersome. So after I proved that it was successful, right, making my adjustments, I wanted to industrialize it, akin to the entrepreneur, avenue of doing my testing, and now I want to move to my prototype. So that was fun, right? So building the requirements for my own tool that I had invested in and saw firsthand, how folks were interacting with it. How can I make it more efficient? So we started out with a version 1 and then elicited feedback. Of course, testing along the way is so key and instrumental, and then made improvements to that to make it run more efficiently, right? So we added, I guess what you consider bells and whistles of all these different user journeys that folks can have throughout our app that they were interacting with. So a lot of fun there. Outside of, I mentioned Backstage Capital, continuing on that and being a hand raiser there, I also led a grant to help us understand a bit more about what's the gap between funding for underestimated entrepreneurs and them actually receiving funds, right? So what needs to happen in other words to better diversify deal flow, right? The grants was funded by JP Morgan Chase, huge company. There's a lot of stake in this. And we were tasked with interviewing venture capitalists to understand, and angel investors understand why they were not investing in underestimated talents, right? What's the issue here? We all know that, diversity leads to stronger outcomes. Why aren't they, putting their eggs into that and in investing in that as much? So spoke to, upwards of 100 investors in this area. And the findings were just so insightful. And it helped to eventually dictate an educational program. Because at the end of the day, what is data if we're not able to action on it? So actionable insights, so important. But really what I found was that a lot of these investors believed that they were investing in underestimated talents, believed that they were treating folks fairly when they were not, right? So they had that mindset of, I'm doing my token X, Y, and Z, but if we observe their behaviors, if we listen to the types of questions that they asked investors who are underestimated versus those who are more privileged, it was so key that there was an unconscious bias going on there, right? So they were appealing more, their questions were much harder on folks who are underestimated. Almost it sounded as if many times they were criticizing them or making them feel inadequate as in their questions. Yeah. So it was just so, it was so interesting. It was demoralizing, right? And so if someone asks you an attacking question, so, hey, Nacho, X, Y, and Z, why aren't you doing that? You should be doing that, right? You're going to be, either defensive or you're going to be quiet, right? Especially with someone who has a pocketbook and you're wanting to get their money, you're going to be a little bit taken back. You're not going to want to talk as much. And so then that led to an unproductive call, right? A meeting. So that was really, really insightful. So at the end of the day, you've heard this, I'm sure, many times before, investing in underestimated talent is not a pipeline problem. There are tons of underestimated founders out there. It's just that there's a lot of bias out there. There's a lot of confirmation bias, people who lack critical self-evaluation that they are participating in, a bias questions and whatnot. So that makes it a bit more tricky, right? So how can you convince someone when they feel like there's no problem, right? So when we attack things, we understand that there's a problem, we go strategically and we want to fix it, and here's our thought behind it. But what happens when the person who you're working with just doesn't feel like there's a problem there? They have no idea that there is one, which makes it, so difficult. So my focus then was, how can we affect change? Like, how can we change mindset here with these folks who don't feel like, there's some issue going on here? And so I posed that to a lot of folks who I was talking with, and overwhelmingly the feedback was, well, you have to affect their pocketbooks, because at the end of the day, folks are just real driven by money, right? That's what's guiding us. That's what's pushing us. And these folks are, as investors, really driven by that. So to two areas of thought came into play here. One was that, well, to affect change, we need to have like a really large number of underestimated founders making it big, right? So making it huge, and then say, well, here's to you, and putting a sock in it for those who are, having old money, right? So they're saying, we're not gonna take your old money. We've made it big on our own, right? And you're punished. In other words, you didn't do a good job. You didn't believe in me, and so I'm not going to take your money, right? So setting that kind of precedent, and that thought is that, hey, that's really affecting their pocketbooks because they missed out on that huge deal, right? Because they weren't being considered by these stereotypical investors. The other area that a lot of folks put forth as a way to touch pocketbook and affect change is the partners themselves. So those investment partners themselves agreeing to champion diversity amongst themselves and as their investment thesis, just like Backstage Capital. And that way they only align to investors who both share that vision and are accountable to it, right? So we say, we're not just gonna say this, we're not just gonna say we invest in diversity, we're gonna put our money where our mouth is, and we're gonna action on that. And not just one, but a big group, right? And so that's really what we found. And lo and behold, it feels as if that's the direction that folks are going in. And so I think there's a ton of progress that's been made in the past few years toward that. And it's just growing, right? But we just need to be conscious about it. We need to make sure we evaluate our questions, what we're doing. And it's easy to have unconscious bias. And so being able to question yourself, just like how you're able to question your hypothesis in your entrepreneur project, is really key, right? And coming in and saying, I'm looking at it from my lens. I need to understand it from other points of view. So that was really, really, really important.
Really?
So yeah, that's in a nutshell the pathway of where I've gotten to where I am today. Much learning around the way, right?
I really love everything what you say, because actually to be an entrepreneur, you need to have a lot of transversal abilities. For example, first of all, you always been passionate and curious. And this normally it reflects on the people you met and how you interact with people. That's why with the people you asked or you told us before that they contact you to actually be an entrepreneur with them, is because for sure you were passionate when actually working with him. So this is a thing that everyone needs to have on their life. It's everything you do, try to be the best one and do it being curious and passionate. Then the
Absolutely.
Then the other thing I really love is that you didn't, even after being working in the same job and being like in an established position, actually get out of this comfort zone, and think is the very hard problem that the entrepreneur has on the first step is get out of this comfort zone. So really,
thank you. Yeah, it's so easy to be comfortable, right? It's just it's natural. That's natural. Stepping out of your comfort zone is uneasy. It makes you sweaty. It makes you, a little bit nervous, right? But it's important. It's nice. Test the waters. Try different things. So key.
Exactly. And then another thing that is actually super curious, normally, even when you make this step and then you want to be an entrepreneur, normally the entrepreneurs want that everything is perfect. No, normally they are waiting that someone, they are thinking that everyone is waiting for the launch of the products.
Right.
Not really. It's not the way or the mindset that we need to have. So it's try to test as soon as possible with the less money that you can invest.
Right.
And then always have a scalable mindset. As you told us, for example, during the investor event, you made like a pilot during the investor event, and then after you be able to run it to a scale.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Start with your bare minimum. Don't put a lot of money into that. And then if that's taken up, you can start scaling quietly. So I think I saw a stat the other day, something upwards of around 70% of startups, one of the main reasons why they fail is because they scale too quickly, right? So they believe that their idea is great. They haven't done their due diligence of testing, and here they are scaling. They're already thinking about, product version 2 when they haven't verified version 1 yet. And they believe, I talked about unconscious bias with investors, but hey, it can be applied here too. We're biased toward our solutions, right? They're ours. It's so often, and I've seen this countless times, it feels as if it's your child, right? It's your baby, it's part of you. You built that's your idea, and you want everyone to be so excited about your idea just as you are. But it doesn't always work that way, right? And you have to understand that, because at the end of the day, you're solving a problem, right? You're not here to build your solution, your dream.
Exactly. It's this. Tara, I will take advantage of this moment because I have some questions from the audience. Yep. And I think it's really super nice if we can answer all of them. For the moment, I have 4. So okay. I'm going to answer the first one. From Auro Warnet, it's Tara, how we can increase our abilities to be attractive to those people who can enjoy our services or products.
How can we increase our abilities to be attractive? In what sense? So is that where you have your idea at first, right? And you're trying to increase your reach in your audience group? So in that case, I would say testing, right? So putting surveys out there. Many times people set up a landing page right from the get-go before they've even started with outlining their MVP, of starting to garner email addresses, right? Because from day one, you want to build excitement about what you're excited about. Even if you end up pivoting, that's okay. Get those email addresses, get those contacts. That's so important. So setting up a landing page, I felt was really helpful. Testing in your community. So, excuse me, there's so much to be said about getting down in the nitty and gritty within your target audience, right? So understanding them from the outside, from the sidelines, like we're outside of the baseball park and we're looking, looking inward, or we're looking at a snow globe from the outside and observing is nice, right? But to really understand those nuances, you have to get down to the level of the people. You have to sit around home plate and first base in order to really see what's going on. What are the reactions? What is natively, more important to folks than others? So I feel like observing is so important. Someone coined the phrase, I think it's called cohort observations, something like this, where you really start to take a look at the cohort of people, or the people who are having the problem or are interested, potentially down the line, interested in your services, to try and describe them, right? So who are those quote unquote champions of your product, and how can we make more of them? Like, what motivates them? Doing some persona analysis. Persona is where you start to develop characteristics that describe a stereotypical person. In this case, your champion, the one who is fully aligned to your product, and how can you find more of them? So understanding who they are is really the first step in doing that, and I think that that's super important. So yeah, surveys, landing pages, cohort analysis, in order to drum up some attention. And then the other thing is really networking, right? So I've been to a lot of investor events, and one of the more common things that I hear is that folks are really, entrepreneurs are really struggling to juggle between their quote unquote main job and their startup, right? Because at the end of the day, you need to make some money in order to pay bills, right? So you have something going that's bringing income, but you still need to, not only work in the dark on your startup, meaning like literally late at night when you're home, go to networking events, meet people, talk, introduce yourself, try to inject yourselves in conversations. Look at your audience, your target audience, and see if there are any events that they're more likely to go to, right? So are they, for example, aligned to something really political in nature? Are they aligned to sports? And go to those events like that so you can try and understand more about them and introduce yourself to them, so you get to know them and get to know their likes, their not, things that they don't like, you never know down the line who might be able to help you, right? Either by being a champion, a mentor, someone you can bounce ideas off down the road. Make an inventory of those events and just start going to them. They're so important.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, if you want to increase abilities, if you do the same thing as always, you are not going to improve nothing.
Right.
So try to have an open mind, meet new people, and then try to live new experiences to actually get to new ways of act.
Exactly. There's this common phrase of what is the definition of insanity? It is repeating the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And that's not what we're about. We're about making change, instilling change. So let's not be, that insane knocking our head on the ground over and over again. Let's make something different.
Exactly. So Tara, I have another question from the audience. This one is from Luis Lenta. What is your advice for starting a startup? Will you focus first on team, on product, or on the problem?
The problem. Yeah, number one, hands down. At the end of the day, you want to think through your problem. You want to make sure that your problem is something that folks are interested in solving, right? How important is it to them? The other things that you mentioned fall in after that, right? So then if that is true, if that is valid, then down the line, you'll work on a team, you'll work on, your value proposition, you'll work on all those other things after, but make sure that your problem is valid, right? That it's not just your problem, that it's a problem to a large audience, your target audience. And number two, folks are so unhappy about that problem. It bothers them so much that they're willing to make a change to whatever it is that they were doing previously, right? So it's enough, not only that it's a problem, but it's enough of a problem to make a change. And then number three, it's enough of a problem to make a change and pay money for it, right? So at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're selling something, quote unquote, selling and making money off of it, right? So if it's something that's just small and not, a huge problem to folks, they're not going to be willing to want to spend money for it. And our startup is never going to be profitable, right? If we're faced with those challenges. So, so make sure, number one, it's a problem to not just me, but to your target audience, your wider audience. And then two, that if it's enough of a problem for them to want to make a change, right? That it bugs them so much. And three, that it is something that they'll want to pay for to make a change.
Exactly. Okay, I have another question, Tara. This one is a particular one, and maybe it's a hard one, but I'm sure you can answer it. It's from Lawrence of PM. I would like to know how we can conduct customer interviews to extract their top 3 pain points without biasing the response through the question.
Okay, so we want to get their pain points. To understand what their pain points are. Okay, so here's what I would do. I would have discussions with folks where I would first elicit, just in a conversational manner, where you talk to folks, right? I talked about networking and connecting with people, connecting with your target audience, where you start to really understand in a conversational manner things that are bothering them, right? What their pain points are. And then I would shortlist, after you have a number of conversations that feel viable, like 50 or so, you start to shortlist those, you put them on a whiteboard, and you see what commonality they have amongst each other, right? So some of them may boil up to a larger topic, right? Some of them, might be not as frequent, and we can cross those off the list. But that way you can scale those responses that come in a conversational manner, really laid back. People don't feel attacked with name your top 3 or whatever like this. It's more of a conversation of folks talking to you. Meanwhile, you're jotting down notes in your minds that you can, toggle up later. And from a large enough group, right? So we're not talking about 5 or 10 people here. We're talking about something that would be statistically sound. So upwards of, at least 50, if not more, conversations. Put them on a whiteboard, see what commonalities they are amongst each other, start ranking them based on your informal discussions with folks, and then put together a survey where folks just need to score, maybe on a 5-point scale about how how important is it for people to solve that problem, or how much, turning it another way, how much does that problem bother you on a scale of 1 to 5? Would you be willing to, and then for those that they list as high, would you be willing to pay money in order to solve that problem? So in essence, it's having those informal discussions, jotting down, and you may even have like a discussion session, like that cohort that I mentioned before, amongst a certain group, in order to elicit that kind of feedback. I love focus groups. So I just find that people start breaking down barriers. You can put food out too. Food is a nice way to get people to start talking a bit more. But those discussion groups, outside of your one-on-one conversations, may be very beneficial. Again, depending on your target audience though. To get folks talking, and you may ask some guiding questions, but you can videotape it, and that way you have some good data, informal data, to help structure your survey. I think it's often tough, they call it survey bias. We can apply the word bias to many things, but survey bias is really similar to the person who is going out and only focusing on their solution, as opposed to listening to how others construct the problem, in which case they may have a different solution tied to that. And many times surveys in and of themselves are biased, right? Because they're slanted toward your idea. You're only asking the questions that will help you validate your solution, right? We're not asking folks, well, maybe it's a different solution, right? We want to hear from them. So I feel that early stage discussions are really the best way of getting out some out of your mindset feedback about what their pain points are. So start with that one-on-one small group discussions, get that feedback, tally it up, put it in a survey, and that way you feel peace of mind that it's not just your pain points that they're scaling. It's it's those that are coming from your target audience.
Okay, and I'm super grateful for this kind of answers, because you are super precisely and you're giving exact examples on things that you can do. So, for example, even how much, what is the minimum number of people that you need to interview to actually get a statistic minimum results. So it's super good.
Absolutely. And just to expand on that, when you do your survey, I'd stick to a minimum of about 100 to get at. And then when you finally hone in on your issue, right, and the solution that's matched to that, you'll want to earmark about, I'd say about 40 to 45% of those who are surveyed would be very disappointed if they didn't have your service or your solution in place. So think about it along those lines as well.
Okay, cool. Okay, Tara, the reality is that we have tons of questions from the audience, and I have to say sorry in advance for everyone because we don't have that much level of time. But I will ask you the final one before cutting you.
Yes.
And in that case, I think the answer could be Backstage Capital, but I'm sure that maybe you can enter into more details. It's Tara, where we can find some people that believe on us to invest time and money with our project.
Okay, yeah. So take a look about what makes you unique, right? So what is it as we look for differentiation of our product in the marketplace, right? We don't want to build something that's already out there. Think about what the constructs of your team are like, right? How would you describe your team? In the case of Backstage Capital, it is underestimated founders, right? And so that was key, right? So if you fall into that mindset, you would align to investors that invest in underestimated talents, that they are focused, their investment thesis on underestimated talent. So if you can imagine, there are investors who are just real specific as to what they'd like to invest in. So when you do an internal audit of your team about what makes you unique and characterizes you, you can then start looking for investors that match that area, right? So they would be much more receptive to hear from you, and the pool of folks who are tapping them up would be much smaller as well. But there's lots of online resources too. There's something called the Mentor Network that you can check out. There's a lot of free resources out there. And I'll just put out there that I wrote an ebook. It's called Angela's Journey, Adventures in Becoming an Entrepreneur. And it talks a lot about the challenges that Angela, which is an underestimated founder, has faced in the hopes of helping you address those challenges moving forward, right? So tap into, in other words, some content out there that you can hit up. Networking events, I mentioned that before, is so important too. And many times investors, you can ask them, if you have a conversation with them, you can ask them, who do you think, who would you recommend to tapping into for advice outside of them, right? So if it's someone who you hook up with, a venture capital company, they're not always going to be available, but they will have a network of contacts that you can tap into. And so try those up if they suggest them to you, in order to see if something aligns and gels with you really well, to take it to the next level.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so Tara, we don't have much time for further questions. Thank you a lot, and thank you very much for all your speech. I mean, I think it's a super helpful and super vast experience. I'm really sure that the explorers I have enjoyed a lot.
I'm so glad. That's wonderful. Great.
And I would suggest explorers, just to get out of the comfort zone, start adding people in LinkedIn, for example, Tara, and be able to touch with her here.
Absolutely. Many folks connect with me, ask questions, ask me to read their project and whatnot. So feel free to connect. Let me know where you're coming from, so I have that context as you connect. Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay.
You're welcome.
Ciao.